Welcome, my name's Una Galani, this is Mahesh Kohli. Greenco is a company that was founded in 2006. It's one of India's largest renewable energy companies with assets spanning hydro, wind, solar, and at this very moment it is building the world's largest integrated, long duration, that's 24/7, grid scale storage project, and that's about 4 hours outside of Hyderabad. This will provide 24/7 carbon-free energy to companies including ArcelorMittal. And Greenco has the strong backing of sovereign wealth funds, including the Singaporeans and the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. And it's also one of Asia's biggest issuers of green bonds. So Mahesh, welcome. Thank you very much. For me, Greenco really embodies India's journey with renewable energy. You've been in this business for a very, very long time, long before many of us started talking about renewable energy. Can you tell us briefly a little bit about the sort of stages of your journey and where you're at now?
Great. No, thanks for inviting me. And I think clearly the whole renewable energy as a concept from where we looked at for India was to support the growth of the energy needs of the country. It was not always about primarily just displacing coal. And for the last 2 decades, India's continuous 8 to 9% GDP growth had required energy growth. India was around in 2009-10 when we started around less than 200 gigawatts of installed base. Now India has more than 420 gigawatts of installed base. India will need to add another 400 gigawatts of new energy to the energy market by 2030. I think the clear strategy and the transition we have always tried to support is how do you make renewable energy what we call as grid parity or economic parity with coal, and how do we support new energy or primary energy addition to the country. So we started with hydro as a means to provide what I call as grid parity carbon-free energy, much later in wind and solar. Now we are building the largest energy storage network globally. We are building 50 gigawatt hours of energy storage by 2025 to support India's need to add another 400 gigawatts of new energy to the ecosystem. And 80% of the last 3 years energy added to the country was from renewables. And if you take that measure, India will be adding more than 300 gigawatts of new energy of renewables to the ecosystem. Just to put it in perspective, India's electricity market is bigger than UK, France, and Germany combined, and India's hydrogen ecosystem is second largest in the world, and so it's a continuous supply of new energy that's required to the country.
Yeah, and some of those numbers you're talking about, I mean, like the sort of 50 gigawatts, that's like a good chunk of what Europe has in mind in terms of its target for storage. I mean, we know that to go carbon-free, we need long duration storage. Europe, India, China, they all have their targets for getting there. What is the solution that you have found works in India?
That's the key pivot we made as a company and as an institution. In 2018, we said, look, energy from renewables has become relatively easy to build. It's a low risk, a low return business. And since 2018, we have focused on how do we make long duration storage economical and scalable, right? Which is what we have done with industrial partners, where we're delivering first of its kind globally, carbon-free energy. What it means is that it's not renewables. Renewables is not carbon-free. Carbon neutral is not carbon-free. Or 100% renewable, some of these jargons we hear is not carbon-free, right? It's totally carbon-free when you can truly deliver on every 15-minute basis or 100 or hourly basis to the grid and to the consumer continuous energy form.
You mean in terms of like matching the usage with the supply into the grid,
Absolutely.
like by the hour, right?
Yeah.
Time matching.
It's not offsetting, right? It's not that what you typically hear large corporates saying we have offset something by buying something. It's as good as planting trees, but here it's really carbon free, which is where a lot of that And so to achieve carbon-free energy storage is the key part. I mean, the whole energy transition has huge limitations without solving energy storage. As I said, the first 15% of energy mix coming from renewables, whether it's India, China, or globally, and Europe, was easy part, right? The last decade, last one to 2 decades, that's what typical energy companies have done. But the difficult part is how do you go from 15% energy mix to 30% to 50%, like Europe has a target to achieve 60% of energy mix from renewables. And that important transition and also achieving hard to abate emissions problems. And long duration storage is key, and the long duration we define it from 6 hours onwards upwards to maybe 12 hours to 15 hours. I think we found a very innovative way or a novel way, I wouldn't say innovative way, and I've traveled around the world and did all those chemistry of batteries.
Well, you're both, I mean, you and your partner are both scientists, effectively, you're science backgrounds.
Science and engineering backgrounds. And what we found an interesting way to achieve scale and economics, we started to work on concept of closed loop pumped hydro. There's nothing but 2 large reservoirs of energy holding reservoirs, and they act like a energy pump and an energy generator. And so we are created this concept called integrated energy storage projects, where you have solar, wind, and this concept called pumped hydro all in a single location, and to deliver less than $50 per kilowatt hour carbon free energy. And put that in a benchmark, in most global markets that will be 2 to 3 times that, right? So the concept of long duration storage achieving $50 level benchmark delivers lowest carbon footprint commodities. It will deliver lowest cost hydrogen, it will deliver lowest cost ammonia. So it puts us, so solving the long duration storage has solved many things.
I mean, effectively, like this is quite an amazing project, because I think my understanding is it's a 16th century solution to a modern day problem, but effectively it utilizes hydropower without the negative connotations of hydro. So for example, it's not directly relying on sort of a natural, well, not natural reservoir, but like it's sort of a closed loop system. So effectively during the day, you're using the solar to pump the water up to a bigger reservoir. And then during the night, you're using the energy generated by bringing the water back downhill to generate energy that goes directly into the grid.
Absolutely. Pumped storage is a well-known concept. Yeah. It was largely used in Europe to balance nuclear power. I think the difference is we have taken that template, made it a lot compact, and enabled a much scalable design. So we've taken a well-known technology and made it scalable and created a very compact outcome. And as I said, we're achieving long duration storage at less than $60 per megawatt hour compared to batteries at $150 to $200.
And that means you're getting good take up from the corporate side. I mean, what kind of demand are you seeing?
I think the key impact we really enable is the big industrial decarbonization was largely untouched by renewables, right? Because renewables can't feed industrial energy. Industrial energy needs to be reliable, it needs to be continuous and flexible. I think this architecture we set out to deliver now, we've seen almost all the big, large industrial corporates, whether it's steel businesses like ArcelorMittal, Hindalco, the second largest aluminum maker in India. They are building a new smelter which will be fed first time in the world with the continuous carbon-free 24/7 renewables. It is never thought about before. So once we make this architecture reliable, the industrial decarbonization is happening at a much faster pace. India is second largest in terms of commodity per capita production. We'll need to grow at a much higher pace. So that's really it's deepening the industrial decarbonization, which was not possible with renewables on its own.
I mean, it's great because it really sort of challenges this idea that India is sort of going slow on the energy transition. In some places it's going very fast, but how appropriate are these solutions for other jurisdictions? Let's take Europe, for example.
Clearly, it's a solution well understood. It's more about how right now, the target India set out for 2030, which is to achieve 50% of energy mix from renewables, will be achieved through this storage. And so which jurisdictions will accelerate storage are the only ones which will be able to meet 2030 target, right? European target of 60% of renewables by 2030 has to go through storage, right? And so we are seeing, of course, China doing, very large scale energy storage. China is set out to deliver 200 gigawatts of pump storage installations by 2027, right? Will deliver the lowest cost carbon free energy. We are seeing in US has opportunity to do it, and Europe will have to go through that. From a pace of this storage, it's still largely driven by batteries, but the transition to this kind of pump storage, I think, beginning to hear in the last 12 months, many countries now opening up this idea and calling for industry participants to come and participate in this. Yeah.
So do you see more willingness now in other parts of the world to industrialize the solutions that we already have today, or is everybody waiting for the next big technology leap before they sort of really embrace storage?
Absolutely, that's the huge impact India is going to benefit from, that we are industrializing what is proven. There are, of course, new chemistries that will come, long duration storage, there are different ideas that's been talked about. I think if you don't industrialize what is already proven, I think most countries will miss the 2030 target. Right? It will take another 3 years to build multi-megawatt scale, and then take many years more to build multi-gigawatt scale. And so I think that's the path India we have taken, is industrializing what is proven, not just in storage, but also in hydrogen making. I said we will be the lowest cost hydrogen. We can deliver green hydrogen in India in less than $3 today, with no subsidies, no tax breaks, no technology, because we have taken technologies like electrolyzers, which are proven, and industrializing it. So as Greenco, we are building a first of its kind 2 gigawatt factory to make electrolyzers by the next 24 months, which will enable us to make lowest cost hydrogen and then lowest cost ammonia. And we have been engaged in very active discussions to bring those molecules to European market by 2025. Right.
What are you finding in terms of practical differences between speed of getting projects going and permissions and regulations between regions?
I think clearly, of course, big countries like China, India are driven with a top-down clear objective by the Prime Minister's office or the government's key intent to fast track, because the urgency in a markets like India, because it's a primary energy. It's not displacing something else, right? So it needs to support industrial growth. It needs to support the quality of life that's rapidly changing. So clearly, we can see a lot more top-down support from the government of India to fast track the regulations and the permits to make this happen. And of course, in the US, it's happening through subsidies and through a lot more taxpayers' capital. In Europe, of course, what we heard is a little bit mixed. Different countries taking different paths. But clearly, the big difference is what we do in India. Probably China is in a similar path. Is primarily to support not just decarbonization. It's also to support the fundamental need for large energy growth, coupled with enabling all new energy growth to happen in the form of clean, carbon-free models. Yeah.
Right, and you mentioned subsidies. My understanding is there's been a lot of discussion about subsidies here today. Are subsidies part of the solution, or are they part of the problem?
I mean, we see subsidies as part of the problem, because it slows down innovation, it slows down urgency and the commercial transition, right? And in India, we do everything with the view that there is no subsidy, and we still have transitioned carbon-free energy cheaper than coal. We're transitioning green hydrogen cheaper than gray hydrogen. We're transitioning, many other important parts of that decarbonization pathways, the industrial decarbonization pathways. In fact, we believe subsidies in OECD markets are distorting the efforts of emerging markets like India, because more subsidies will attract supply chains to those markets where they can charge much higher. So India, markets like India, has benefited from global supply chain, will now have to build its own supply chain, because the subsidies are distorting where the supply chains are going to focus.
Which kind of subsidies do you have in mind when you're sort of thinking about the distortion?
Clearly, all the manufacturing subsidies, what we heard in US market.
The Inflation Reduction Act.
Inflation Reduction Act. Even in Europe, we see a lot of subsidies being offered in terms of the project capex and for green hydrogen and renewables. I think India has driven that model very differently. India creates centralized demand that creates scale, that creates amazing amount of competition, and a lot of entrepreneurship that drives India's energy transition. What I see in different markets is more driven by, corporates, even large corporates with big balance sheets, with high profitable scenarios due to current energy prices, keep requesting for subsidies. So it's a bit unknown territory for us. In India, we're used to delivering solutions which are economically driven by demand, driven by scale, and innovation.
And how do you feel that the sort of attitudes of companies and CEOs as a result of the difference in the top-down approach between regions is coming across? I mean, you're obviously pitching projects in different regions as well. I mean, how are you seeing that?
Clearly, it depends on the priorities. As I said, right now we can see a similar urgency coming in Europe now to what India was working for the last 2-3 years. There's a different atmosphere. It is, as I said, it's not just top down. All the corporates in markets like India are working singularly with the objective. Even the largest energy company in India, NTPC, have said they want more than 60 gigawatts of coal, and they've said we will transition to 100% renewable. They did not say we will do a bit of coal, a bit of renewables. ONGC, the largest oil and gas company, have recently formed a joint venture with Greenco to create green hydrogen and green ammonia. So there's a singular focus in most large corporates in India. As I said, in other countries, we see it driven by, largely, financial reasons, and largely, how do they redeploy their balance sheets, either to buy back shares as much to really prioritizing decarbonization. So as I said, it's a different landscape we are operating, and less driven by financial views, more driven by the opportunity to fast track.
Yeah, I mean, you've given us a lot to think about in terms of what's going well in India and what's driving that change. I mean, where do you see the weak link in India's energy transition and the speed at which it can make that?
Really, India did benefit from global supply chains, with a big part of the cost of solar energy coming down significantly. It came down by 200% in 5 years' time. But all of that is under challenge right now due to the whole global supply chain for solar panels and the clean technologies for electrolyzers, for the wind turbines. And so the globalization has changed to become more, whether it's protected directly or indirectly, right? Subsidy is another way to protect supply chains to remain within the countries. I think India will not probably as much benefit from the globalized supply chain. So India does not have enough manufacturing capacity. It will take probably 2-3 years to achieve the scale required to keep the pace of acceleration. And so that's the biggest weakest link for this, that we need to rapidly scale up manufacturing of all the value chain technologies, whether it's solar, electrolyzers, wind, and but India is blessed with diverse resources, single largest grid in the world, and a lot of, fundamentals to accelerate energy transition.
So 2 more questions for you before we run out of time. One is, what would you like to see achieved by COP27?
Again, from India perspective, right? Obviously, this point about the 100 billion concept never happens. So at least we believe that Article 6.2 and 6.3, operationalizing it to create carbon finance, to enable carbon markets to develop and become more commercial. So enabling 6.2, 6.3 article and operationalizing it will create another support system for emerging markets and access carbon finance.
Yeah, so COP really needs to start delivering on the promises to emerging markets. And in terms of, final question, cheeky one from me, but what are Greenco's plans? I mean, you've got a fascinating story. How supportive of private markets? Do you see yourself listing your company at some point?
Greenco was a listed company in London, so we are very we're fond of London. The first 10 years of our journey was well supported by the London financial market as a listed platform. I think clearly we're at a path where being private helped us to take some of these massive energy storage type opportunities. I think clearly private markets with sovereign wealth funds have been very supportive. I think we will be at some point keen to come back to markets like London to support our next phase of growth.
Fabulous. Well, we look forward to seeing you here soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.